Good morning. We really appreciate you guys hanging out with us on this last day. And we're going to end up talking about a topic that I feel like is underserved, and that is AI in crisis management. As you probably remember, when in 2022, when ChatGPT came out, the discussions have started, and then it's gone from more enterprise-wide, where we're starting to go from an ideation where this is a great idea to scale it's in production. So now the thing is AI perfect? We know, no, it's not. So what do we do within crisis? And the one thing that I thought about, first of all, it was back in 2012. There was a company called Knight Capital, and they lost $440 million in 45 minutes because of a lack of crisis management. It was a software upgrade, very analogous to AI, and they never really recovered. So with that being said, that put us on high alert on how should we handle AI in production when there is a crisis. Is it just a checklist, or should it be a practice and a principle? So to help us with that discussion, we have an esteemed panel here that I will let them introduce themselves, and I'll start with you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Wade. Hi, all. I'm Caitlin Ringrose. I'm a privacy and cybersecurity attorney at McDermott, Will & Schulte. It's a global law firm. And before joining the law firm, I worked at Google as global policy lead for law enforcement and government access. So at Google, I helped train Google's Gemini product, which is originally called Bard. And there we were barraging it with questions to make sure that it wasn't revealing private or sensitive information about our users. And so now at the firm, I work with clients on the same issues. I try to make sure that their AI is safe and secure, and that their users' and clients' data is also secure. So happy to chat about that today. I work a lot on crisis situations, and so that's mostly what we'll be covering. And I do want to say, shout out to Chelsea here, my co-panelist. We worked together for years at Google, and I was just so happy to be on the panel with her.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Magnet. I'm a director at the Brunswick Group. We're a critical issues firm. We deal with a lot of crisis situations and helping clients protect their reputation. I co-lead our client-facing AI work, so that's everything from helping clients build their AI narrative to responding to crises when those things come up. Like Caitlin mentioned, we were on the same team in the policy org at Google. I led the portfolio on AI and cybersecurity, so both thinking about security risks to AI models, but then also how you use AI to combat cybersecurity threats. So really glad to be here and be talking about AI risk.
Hey, everybody. My name is Marcel Williams, and I'm fortunate to be able to help lead culture and engagement for Humana Military. And when it comes to AI, I've been a fan ever since November 22, right? When ChatGPT 3 came out, and just really from the rafters have been singing the alarm, singing the praise of AI, right? Also making sure that we watch out for the risks in AI, and that's where I know you, Wade, right? From at Humana, right? We've had some good conversations about it.
Absolutely, had some good times within Humana Healthcare, in the federal government space, in the retail space, in the financial space, in AI. So Marcel, definitely a great advocate for the technology. Let's get into it. So in regards to AI and CAI, as far as covering ourselves in the AI space, let's talk about crisis. Was there a situation that you had within your organizations that you saw AI had to be dealt with when it was into a crisis mode?
Yeah, so as outside counsel, I'm often a first responder for these sorts of situations when they come up for our clients. All my clients have my cell phone number. If my phone goes off on the panel, I might have to leave. And I can describe one situation that happened recently with one of my clients. This client is global, it's in manufacturing, and I got a call from them on a Monday morning saying, Caitlin, last week we had an issue. One of our C-suite executives was getting a barrage of WhatsApp messages, all these emails from a vendor saying you hadn't paid your bill. And she actually sent out millions of dollars to this vendor over the course of the weekend. And she thought something was fishy. It turns out to have been a fraud, right? That money has been lost. The money is across Eastern Europe, it's in China. What do we do? And I was like, this happened on Thursday, but it's now Monday. You didn't call me. And my client was like, well, it's the weekend. I couldn't possibly bother you. So the first lesson for the client was, no, reach out anytime. I'm always available. And so AI-powered scams and frauds are everywhere. They're impacting all of my clients. They will impact your company. And so it's important to be on the lookout. In that case, the client did a few things that escalated the incident, right? Not reaching out right away. 2, by not reaching out, they couldn't get their funds back. So the FBI, if you let them know within 24 hours, they have about an 80% recovery rate of funds because they can start a kill chain process. This client dropped down to like 0 to 5% recovery for these millions, right? But they also did a few things right. So first, they made sure that everyone within the org and the board knew what was happening. Second, they did ultimately reach out to my team and get forensic investigators on board. And third, they had good relationships, or good enough to be able to reach out to the FBI in a way that was able to start the process right away, and we were able to recover some of those funds. That said, it's so important right on the onset to have a crisis comms manual, so you know who to reach out to, and an incident response plan. So those are the 2 things I advise. And I will say that was a mixed bag incident, but it was entirely powered by AI. The people who were reaching out were impersonating vendors. They were creating messages with AI. They had false invoices. All of that was driven by a large language model.
Very good. Appreciate it. Same question, Chelsea.
I'll build off of what Caitlin said, because I think we're certainly seeing some of these scams take place, and especially as AI gets more sophisticated, we're seeing this at a accelerating rate. But I want to touch on what you said about comms plans, because I feel like a lot of what I see with my clients is sort of the pre-crisis moment where they don't necessarily have a coherent narrative for what their AI does, the risks that they're thinking about, how their clients and their customers should be thinking about it. And so what I usually see happen is that they have some things on paper, but leadership realizes that there isn't actually a coherent AI plan or crisis comms playbook, something like that in place. And obviously there's a lot of reputational risk associated with that. If you're not all singing from the same song sheet when something does happen, there's, to Caitlin's point about how fast these things occur, you risk a lot of your reputational bona fides in those moments when you're not responding quickly. So I think it's a lot, for me, a lot of just like making sure the plan is in place so that you can action quickly.
Thank you. Marcel.
Yeah, working for Humana Military, obviously, there's a lot of confidential information, can't give any specific incidents. Thankfully, we haven't had any, to really speak about. But in thinking about this question, Wade, I did jot down a couple points I like to make. I think it's very important that you confirm what is real, right? And do away with anything that's fiction. You want to make sure that you want to see, is the content authentic, right? Or is it fully synthetic? You want to define the risk. That's extremely important. Who could be harmed? Is it your customers? Is it your employees, right? Is it a product or the company's reputation, right? And then agree on a single version of the truth. I think it's important to understand that you don't have to be perfect with it, but you do have to be aligned. And that's very important in a situation like that. Bringing legal in, Chelsea, bringing legal in along with IT security, communications, and then an executive presence that can make hard decisions about what needs to happen. But it needs to happen swiftly, and it needs to happen in alignment.
Appreciate that. Here's another piece we want to talk about, and that is, as we talk about crisis, we don't want to talk about it in theory. Let's talk about how can we really implement. And one of the big things that you want to consider when it comes to crisis is, what's the big 5 threats in AI? It's always bias, intellectual property, deep fake, privacy, and then hallucinations. Those are the buckets that you want to watch out for. So with that being said, the question is, which is the best, or which is the thing you want to take care of first? And I'm going to go with the deep fake. There was a European company, I'm not going to name the name, it was an energy company. And they had a person use something like 11 Labs to fake the voice of the CEO, call into the bank, and ask for a transfer of $240,000. It went through. This is AI. So this is the threat. So with that being said, I'm going to ask you, Caitlin, what do you feel like the most pertinent risk should we consider, how and why?
Yeah, I think that example is perfect. I'm very familiar with it. I didn't work on it, of course, but voice cloning comes up quite a bit in my work. I do think that companies are reasonably familiar with cybersecurity laws, are reasonably familiar with privacy laws. We have 50 state data breach laws, and we have a handful of state comprehensive privacy laws, although we have nothing at the federal level. So companies are generally familiar with what they need to know for that sort of risk, but they're not familiar with what they need to do in terms of transparency and bias audits. And so we are seeing state legislation requiring those sorts of audits, those sorts of assessments, and companies just aren't prepared for enforcement action there. They're not sure how to gauge what they're doing against their competitors, especially since it can be so murky and unclear what kinds of tech their competitors are adopting. And so I think it will be very startling to have those first enforcement actions come to bear for executives in particular.
Very good, very good. Now, when we talk about this crisis, and that's a great example. And then Marcel, you talked about how we need to have legal involved and verifying with the tech teams, and then leadership as far as that's concerned. I'm going to ask you this question in regards to what you've seen in Humana. What steps should we take to verify that, hey, this is a crisis, and what should be next before we go public with, hey, something bad happened?
Man, that's a tough one. I'm going to say, the first thing is just to make sure that there's trust within the company. You know, in my mind, a crisis like that is, if you can't respond to it well, or you can respond, it's a culture situation, right? And you need to make sure that the culture is ready to act swiftly, that everybody's engaged in what's going on.
Gotcha. Caitlin, is there like a bottleneck that we need to consider, because you got legal risk and compliance, well, in Chelsea, legal risk and compliance, and there's just these checks and balances that we need to consider. Is there one place that are bottlenecks, and how can we eliminate?
Yeah, I like, Marcel, your point about company culture. I think a lot of companies lose time just figuring out who needs to be in the triage room, right? They're so used to dealing with daily business. They're like, well, I don't want to offend this executive by not inviting them, and so then they have a really bloated incident response team, or they want to move really quickly and they only have 2 or 3 people in the room. And so that's something I see as a massive time waste, right? Why are we spending so much time talking about who needs to be there? Right. You could have figured that out early on, to Chelsea's point about preparing. So I do think having a plan, having everyone's cell phone numbers, having the ability to reach out really quickly, and figuring out like who are the 5, 6 people that you need to have in the room that are just indispensable, and then make sure that you know how to operate without them. Make sure that if that person is on mat leave, that person's on an airplane, you have someone else to reach out to, and don't spend that time spinning wheels. Another big time waster is just not knowing who your vendors are, not knowing who your external crisis comms folks are, who your outside counsel is, not having a copy of your own insurance policy. So many clients are like, well, I think HR has that, or I don't know where that lives. And I'm like, you actually have to abide by the exact tenets of that policy. So those are the things that I see as time sinks.
Great.
And if I can just jump in here,
Please,
I think this is where scenario planning is absolutely critical. It's going to be hard for any of us to predict the exact incident or the exact moment that this is going to happen. But what you can do is sort of plan for different buckets of incidents that might be reasonable for your organization, like where you think about where you might be the weakest. And then to Caitlin's point, it's bringing the right people into the room and sort of developing that operational muscle so that when something does happen, you're ready for it.
So keeping the mic with you, Chelsea.
Yeah.
In regards to red teams and planning, as far as scenario planning, because I think about red teams, their responsibility is to be the enemy within, how can we break the bias? How can we, deal with the deep fake? So what does that look like in regards to having red teams and being preemptive in our care for crisis? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, for me, with a lot of my clients, I think red teaming looks like being very honest about where you're reputationally the weakest and where an incident could really hurt you the most. And then, being thoughtful about what that might look like moving forward. So, as an example, and I work with a lot of health care providers, not Humana, so caveat. But when I was looking at their AI narratives and their crisis response plans, a lot of the language was about, how they were using AI to really help doctors move faster and, to ease bureaucratic administrative processes, and that's all great, but when one of those companies or organizations has an issue, it's not going to be about that, right? It's going to be about bias in the model. It's going to be about, is there some patient privacy concern that you weren't thinking about? And so just using that as a hypothetical, like being really honest with yourself as an organization, like how could someone, poke a hole in my narrative and make people not trust what I have to say? So not only is it sort of the rapid response, but like thinking through, how can we sort of lay narrative pieces and signals out there? Is that blog posts? Is that, paid content, to make sure that we're sort of putting a stake in the ground so that if something bad does happen, there are things that people can point to. And while we're on the topic of AI, I think it's also important to note that, these narrative pieces all show up in the LLMs these days. So when there is an incident, most people will sort of like turn to Google, I think is a good one to point out. Search includes AI as the top result now. Gemini is what we all go to. And so sort of laying those stakes in the ground and being thoughtful about your narrative gets pulled into the LLMs. And so that can go a huge way. Even if you're not releasing a statement early on, the LLMs will reflect sort of your positioning, and that buys you a little bit of time.
I like that. Red teams, one more question on that. As organizations, again, we want to be strategic but very tactical. Who should be on the red team?
Oh, I would be interested in everybody's thoughts on this because I think it is a huge group of stakeholders. So obviously your comms teams, your policy teams, product teams, but then I think you really have to be thoughtful about the type of risk that you're thinking about and build from there, because not all risks are the same. And so I realize I'm talking a lot about narrative and company reputation from sort of an internal perspective. So, you're going to have a variety of stakeholders from that perspective. Caitlin is going to answer that question slightly differently because she's thinking about like an AI-enabled cyber incident. That might not be as relevant for some of the scenarios that I'm talking about. So I think it's like being really thoughtful about who has a job and also not adding too many people to the room, because then you can sort of get bogged down in the bureaucracy of trying to clear something with every person, and that's also really hard.
So what I'm hearing is, we always say with AI, it's not a one size fits all, it's a one size fits one.
Yes.
So it depends on the organization. Marcel, question for you. If there was one scenario-based, simulation that would be run from your perspective, what would be the one? I know it's several, but what would be the one most important to you think?
I think deep fakes that involve leadership. I think they erode trust immediately, internally. In this day and age, it's becoming increasingly easier to do, right? So deep fakes that involve leadership, and then making sure that, to Chelsea and Caitlin's point, making sure that you have that tight team that can respond quickly, not over a weekend, right? You need to respond in hours, minutes if possible, but definitely not days.
Right. Gotcha. I like that. So let's move on and talk about who should be contacted next in regards to transparency. Now, here's the thing. We know that now the internet has been in existence for 42 years. Everything from the Gutenberg printing press to what happened yesterday is on the internet. So in regards to how we use that data, how transparent should we be? I think about one scenario really quickly, and then I want to come to you, Caitlin. And that is, it was a company called Clearview AI. Now, Clearview AI is voice or face recognition. And as they were building their application, they were using the AI as the data, and they scraped the internet for literally billions of images. Your faces, our faces, and then once the product was up and running, everything was fine. Then the question was, well, how did you do it? Where did you get these images? Without consent. They couldn't answer the question. So legal risk compliance came into play, the EU got into play, and come to find out, they didn't have consent for any of our faces, but they were making money from our faces. So with that being said, how transparent should we be in regards to how we are building applications, letting our customers know what we're doing with our data, not HIPAA, but our data? What does that look like, Caitlin?
Yeah, well, first, your early point about red teaming, and to Chelsea's point, too, which was amazing about just figuring out where you're most vulnerable and being very honest with yourself as a company. We had a client maybe 6 months ago who wanted to do a tabletop, and we asked them, like, where are you vulnerable? And they were in manufacturing, and they said, well, we only manufacture a couple months out of the year. The rest of the year, we're preparing to manufacture. And so if something hits us right then and takes, like, even 10 minutes to fix, we'll lose millions of dollars in that very, very short period of time, right? And it could be something as simple as like the power going out, or it could be something as complex as a ransomware attempt. So we ran a red team tabletop with them, and it was something like they couldn't mitigate every risk, right? But we wanted to let them know what they would do if something like that were to happen. A few weeks later, I get a call, hey, it actually did happen. We were down for 10 minutes, totally unforeseen incident. It was like a storm in the area, but we treated it like it was a cybersecurity incident. We used the exact same people, we used the exact same plan, and we solved it very quickly. And I think that that was just because they were very honest. In terms of transparency, I'm a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer necessarily. But I will say that there is a myriad of state and local laws that require user notice. And so they require notice to state attorney generals, they require notice to users, and also to the media. And so I would say that that's your bare minimum. They say exactly what you need to disclose to the public. But then on top of that, as a company, you have a reputation to maintain, you have your own voice, and you need to use that when you're going out and speaking to your users and clients. I do have clients who set up call centers to make sure that people can reach out or reach out proactively to their top customers. I think that's all wonderful. There are two risks with over-disclosure, with being like too honest right away or going out there and just saying whatever. The first is legal risk. You're going to say something that's not true, right? Not accurate. And then later you'll get caught up in an investigation. It'll be really embarrassing, and you'll have to issue all these apologies that stretch out the length of a crisis. And then the second is cybersecurity risk. If you've fallen for a cyber incident, you don't want to give threat actors a playbook on how to do that to you again, right? So you really need to make sure that you're thinking of those two risks. But other than that, I think you do need to be honest, you need to be accurate, you need to be timely, and you need to be speaking in your own voice.
Yeah, I want to add to that if that's okay. And Kate, I think that's very important to have the important, right, the technical people, the decision makers, but that authenticity is incredibly important. You have to be, in this day and age when information travels so fast, right, and people see through, they see through the fakeness, right? And so you really want to make sure you're approaching it from an authentic standpoint, and you need to have some, I want to say, employee-facing people in the room to help make those decisions human, right? And I see a lot of times we'll make decisions, it works for the bottom line, it works for the company's reputation, but it doesn't necessarily work for people. And I think it's very important that you keep that aspect.
Strong statements, Chelsea.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the excellent points raised by both Caitlin and Marcel. And I would also say, as I think about transparency, I think you really have to be thoughtful about who the audience is. So Caitlin talked a bit about regulators and law enforcement. I think you're speaking to like broader public. And it's what I see people do fairly often and make mistakes as it really relates to transparency is thinking about like what the person actually cares about. And I absolutely think it speaks to your point about authenticity, both being authentic in how you're answering the question, but then like giving people what they want to know. I feel like in this day and age, and no offense to Caitlin, we get a lot of like legal jargon
Offense
or
taken.
we'll fight about this later. But I think about this, especially I'm sorry to any people who are involved in the healthcare space. I feel like you guys have an exceptionally hard time with this. But we did a lot of great research recently, focus groups and surveys around how people trust AI messaging in a healthcare context. And we found overwhelmingly that if companies sort of explained what they were doing, before there was really tailored messaging that talked about how the AI benefited the customer and what it meant for the customer and the patient, trust in the statement was incredibly low. It was like 10%. But once you're like really getting at the heart of what someone deeply cares about, it jumped to 70, 80%. And so I think, key in transparency is like who you're talking to and hitting at the root of their actual question.
That's so important. And that reminds me of another question, Chelsea. I'm going to stay with you on this one. And that is, from a boardroom perspective, KPIs. If leadership is saying, okay, if we're going to be preemptive and proactive when it comes to crisis management, when it comes to AI, what are the KPIs show that, we're doing the right things at the right time?
Yeah, for me, this isn't necessarily like an AI audit or like a technical metric. It's how prepared are you with a statement and with a tight team when something happens? That is critical, and I think we've all sort of hit on it, but timeliness in these scenarios is absolutely important. And again, that idea of making sure you're singing from the same songbook and speaking with an authentic voice in a way that really matters to your audience. And so I think it's just operational fluency and like speed in that situation.
This looks like you had a thought.
Yeah, I think it's so hard for companies to justify spending any money on cybersecurity preparedness, right? And then they're in the thick of an incident and they feel terrible, and it takes so much time to recover any money at all if you get any back. And your reputation is in tatters. And so it's really hard to justify that time and that spend. And I would say that what I see in terms of preparedness is that companies who've weathered a lot of storms are a lot more prepared to say, well, we actually need to put these risk mitigation measures in place. And companies that have been experiencing a lot of sunny days don't do that. And so I say, like, KPIs are almost impossible in this space. It really just comes with that experience that like corporate executives feel in their bones.
Good point. Go ahead.
I was just going to jump on to what Caitlin said, because I would say the other big piece of companies who have like built the operational muscle is going back to your previous question about transparency, how transparent they were about an incident and like, again, creating that trust. And I think, again, this speaks to like the credibility of the voice. It's like you trust those companies who've been through this and have, especially in a cyber incident that's related to AI or not, been transparent with customers and said, here's what happened, here's how we fixed it, here's what we're going to do moving forward. Like that sort of muscle over time helps so much.
We want to leave some time for questions. Thank you and thank you. In regards to transparency, the areas that I've seen just being in this space is legal, risk and compliance first, then the tech team to make sure, hey, what happened, and then comms is the third. But these are 1A, 1B, and 1C. How do we communicate out what happened? Transparency. And then lastly, leadership, making sure leadership is involved. And it's two scenarios that I saw intimately Target. And I can say this because it's in Trade Rags. Because of a lack of protection, data protection, 40 million card members were exposed, 40 million. So they had to go into that scenario as to how do we handle that. Same thing with Air Canada. They had a chatbot that was saying bereavement fees for airlines is half the price, and it wasn't even true. They go to court and they lose because they say everything that AI says you are responsible for. So those teams have to not only verify what's happening, like you mentioned, Marcel, but also take responsibility, be honest and authentic as organizations. So with that being said, one more question, and I want to turn over to the audience. What do you think is the biggest myth that organizations and leadership have in regards to crisis, AI crisis?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the Target example. I use that all the time, actually, and the Air Canada one, which is really like approaching people from an authentic and human standpoint, too. Not abiding by bereavement policy is not the most empathetic thing to do. I think that most companies think this is not going to happen to me, right? Oh, it happened to those companies. It's not going to happen to me. And that sort of hubris is what gets them in trouble. We need to realize that these issues are widespread, that threat actors are kind of looking across the board to find vulnerable links. So something I work with all the time is the issue of North Korean IT workers getting hired into US companies. They impersonate a US person, they steal their social security number, they create deepfake videos, they have deepfake interviews, they bypass a background check provider that's not really looking to figure out where a person is, right? They're looking for, like, is this a real human who doesn't have a criminal background? And so a lot of my clients happen to be hiring these individuals from North Korea who are working out of a cyber cafe and have a laptop farm in the US. And I tell this to all my clients every meeting, like, watch out for this. And they're like, oh, that's so silly. Why would we hire a North Korean threat actor? And then a couple weeks later, I get a phone call like, oh, we actually found 2 or 3 in our system. And so I think that sort of hubris, that sort of like myth of this is not going to happen to me, it just captures the industry. And I think it's a very negative place to start.
Excellent. Chelsea, same question. Big myth.
Yeah, I very much agree with Caitlin's. I would say the other one that comes to mind for me is that AI risk is really related to technical compliance and audits and things like that. And I think as we've all kind of hit on throughout the panel, it's really a cross-functional, high-level reputational risk that everybody needs to be involved in. Well, not everybody. We talked about the key stakeholders, but you need to be really thoughtful about making sure the right people are in the room, not just your technical folks.
Excellent. Marcel.
Yeah, I'm going to say the biggest myth is that we're not going to be okay. We're going to be all right. You know what I'm saying? We're good. We got this. We survived 100% of our worst days on this planet, right, as a species, and we will continue to. And the thing, you know, with AI, I think it's transformative, like the introduction of money, right? When we first discovered money, it transformed the way that we operate, right? And it, in and of itself, is not good or bad. You know, that you're going to have some bad actors, just like you have bad actors with money, right? And we've been dealing with it for centuries now. And we, you know, it's just part of our everyday, right? The way that we deal with money. AI will be the exact same way, right? So I'm going to say, don't panic, right? You're going to be all right.
Appreciate that. AI is not a tech problem, it's a people problem. Okay, got it, good. So with that being said, thank you guys, appreciate it. I want to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions, comments, concerns that you have? In the middle here, and then to my left. Yes.
Thank you so much. We are here, a small company, to implement a company-wide AI strategy. So right now, we're using it for marketing, website, digital, but we're looking to expand company-wide. So we don't technically have an AI crisis communication plan. Where does that come into the pipeline? Do we need to have one now, even though we're not an AI strategic company yet? Or where does it come in the planning chart for AI strategy?
Caitlin, I'm going to defer to you because I have a thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are saying, like, well, we're not AI first yet, and so we don't have to adopt these things, but all of your vendors are already adopting AI, and if, from my world, if that vendor has a vulnerability or gets attacked, questions might come to you too. So I would definitely put that in your roadmap, in your kind of immediate roadmap. I would say there's also other documents that would be helpful. So something like an AI acceptable use policy for your employees, making sure that they know what they can and can't use. If you just tell your employees, no AI, no LLMs for you, guess what they're doing? They're using them all. And so it's really helpful to adopt one trusted and proven tool. And then, of course, vendor agreements. You want to make sure that your vendors are abiding by your own principles. So I would put that parcel of documents as all like very equally important. And I would start thinking of yourself maybe not as an AI-powered entity yet, but you're definitely one that relies on downstream vendors and downstream users and deployers of this tech.
Chelsea?
I think it's also a question of scale. It sounds like you guys are really still in your building phase, and that's great. I feel like when we talk about this, a lot of our clients are these mega corporations, right? And so we're talking about these plans like they're huge, multi-page documents, and
They don't
I think
have to
that's
be.
certainly true, but it does not have to be in your case. I think just doing some dedicated thinking about what it might look like and how you would respond if there was an incident, and sort of just having a rough plan in place could go a long way versus, sort of thinking about all the stakeholders and all the steps that we've sort of talked about at a bigger scale.
Yeah, I would say you absolutely need to do it now,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely right now, regardless of really what the company is focused on right now, because AI is just it's a part of our society right now, and it's just like if you don't have a social media plan and you don't have a plan, to secure or really uphold your reputation, then I think you'll be at a huge loss if, regardless of how unnecessary those conversations need to happen. I think it's a top 3 agenda item that needs to happen with, on your leadership calls.
Great. Thank you for your question. Good one. Next one.
Good morning. I heard it mentioned a couple of times bias as it relates to AI and in crises. Can you give an example of what that looks like from an AI perspective or as it relates to AI?
Absolutely. So I'll take this one if you don't mind. In regards to bias, a lot of times, and I'm going to use mortgage companies for just one example, we may use AI to look at data because one of the things really quickly AI will do, data collection, knowledge transfer, and knowledge surfacing, patterns, and then content generation. And so if you're using AI to say this loan is approved or not approved, it's based on what? And because humans are programming AI, what you could possibly see is a particular person with a particular parameter that should be approved for a loan, and AI does not approve it, we have to look into the black box as into why. But that's something where we need inference to not just say AI, just because they said it, it's right. But that's just one example. It's interference. So as we look at and collect information and get the output, make sure there's a human involvement as to, okay, if it's no, why no? And if it's yes, why yes? That's just one example in regards to bias.
And real quick, I know we're short on time. I think if you think of like beauty standards, right? If you're feeding AI what beauty standards are, and you're only restricting it to a certain demographic, right? A certain look, right? A certain size, a certain shape, a certain way that they speak, then AI is going to consider that, whatever you feed it as the standard of what beauty is, right? I think it's important to make sure that, you're checking that information that gets that gets fed into these systems.
Our time has expired. We can stay around and talk in the hallways. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.